All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk with me on this Tuesday afternoon. Another packed episode. We're going to wrap up the NFL draft. 13 Georgia players were drafted. Going to talk about that as well as the 4 who signed as undrafted free agents. We're going to talk about Georgia football, adding another interior offensive lineman from the transfer portal, what that means and sort of where things stand with Georgia in the portal. We'll talk Georgia basketball with 2 big additions on Monday, and we'll also talk a little Georgia baseball as they got things back on track with a big series win over Oklahoma. So hope you will stick around for this Junkyard Dawgcast episode. Subscribe on YouTube at Dawgs247. Go check us out at Dawgs247.com and hang around for another entertaining show. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk with me on this Tuesday afternoon, a post-draft edition of the Junkyard Dawgcast. We're going to talk about the 13 Georgia players who were drafted over the weekend. We'll also talk about the 4 guys who signed as undrafted free agents. We'll talk about Georgia adding UCF center Walt Flynn Jr., what that means for Georgia, if we expect anything else from the Bulldogs in the portal. Also talk about Georgia basketball, which had a big Monday, and Georgia baseball getting things back on track. But fellas, let's start with the draft. We did our episode on Friday, talking quite a bit about the first-round picks and Michael Williams, Jalen Walker, Malachi Starks. After that, 10 more guys get drafted over the course of the weekend. Going to that second round, Tate Ratledge ends up with the Detroit Lions. Third round, Dylan Fairchild to the Bengals, Jared Wilson to the Patriots. Fourth round, Arian Smith to the Jets, Trevor Etienne to the Panthers. Then you've got Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins to the Vikings, Smile Munden to the Eagles in the 5th round, Warren Brinson to the Packers in the 6th round, Dan Jackson and Dominic Lovett close things out in the 7th round of the draft. So let's start there with the guys who were drafted. 13 players overall. Georgia just misses out on the most, with Ohio State having 14 players picked. Kipp, what did you think of how this draft shook out for these Bulldogs and another successful draft class for UGA?
Yeah, I think we talked about this, and I think maybe I thought I projected 14 would be taken. But to Ben's point on the last pod, once you get kind of the 7th round, it's at this point, it's just as well if you're not drafted and you get to actually pick a situation that gives you a better chance of making the roster. And those were all kind of 50-50 guys. I thought whether or not they would get drafted at that point. I actually thought they were kind of ahead of where I projected going into the 7th round. I think they had was it 10 or 11 guys going into the 7th round. So I think all in all, another really very solid performance from Georgia in the draft. And I don't know if we confirmed it or not, but they had a player taken in every single round of the draft. And I don't know if Ben was able to find anything, but I don't think it's ever happened before. And so that in itself is impressive. The third time in the last 8 years that Georgia's had 3 players taken in the first round is impressive on its own. But just overall, now I think Georgia actually passed a couple programs for all-time draft picks. They passed LSU for 8th place. And I think, they didn't pass Penn State, but they're within reach of catching Penn State for 7th place next year. So they're now at 392 draft picks all time. So moving up right there after Penn State, I believe, is Alabama. I think they're at 411. So a little bit of distance there, and obviously a program that's been pretty productive in the draft, but impressive overall. And I think, if you're Kirby Smart in the program, you have to be just proud of the fact that, once again, I mean, anytime you can cross, a dozen guys drafted, that you've developed a lot of players to the NFL.
Yeah, it was a very productive draft. It was smart when I set that over under last week to go over because it wound up really paying off, paying dividends there. Ben, what did you think of this draft haul from Georgia? How this played out and seeing so many guys get drafted?
Well, it was interesting almost to see the juxtaposition of how people reacted to the 2024 season and then see the NFL draft haul that Georgia had. Like, on one hand, I mean, especially with the offensive line, I think it's easy to start there and look at the offensive linemen and say, what happened in 2024. It's hard to reason with the 3 athletic draft picks that they had and then the offensive line the way that it was. But you can also look at it and say Georgia had 13 NFL draft picks and they won the SEC. Like, there's a reason why they won the championship this year, even though they weren't the perfect football team. And it's because they still had a lot of talent on it from top to bottom. And I think, it sounds cliche, boring. If we do these NFL draft things for 10 years under Kirby Smart, you're going to hear a lot of the same conversation. But, like, this is what Georgia rosters look like. Like, I think it's almost more surprising. It's not surprising that Ohio State and Notre Dame had more players drafted than Georgia, but it's almost more surprising at this point when you finish a draft and you say, oh, multiple teams had more players drafted than Georgia did than in years where Georgia doesn't just have the most drafted, because that's sort of what you're expecting. Whether that's how it plays out on an annual basis or not, you just almost expect Georgia to have more guys drafted than other teams. I'll also say, I don't know how you all felt, but it's almost easier to reason with Georgia losing to Notre Dame at the end of the year when you turn around and look and see, all right, they've got 14 guys drafted. Like, it's not easy to lose to Notre Dame. It's not easy to lose any playoff game like that. But I do feel like when you realize, oh, wait a minute, this was a Notre Dame team that was absolutely stacked with NFL talent, I think it's easier to understand how a game at the end of the year when you don't play well goes the way that it did.
I know that Falcons fans were excited to see Xavier Watts wind up getting him out of Notre Dame. That was super exciting. I would encourage folks, if you're listening to this and want to hear sort of more about the first rounders, to check out that episode we did on Friday. I'd like to kind of focus on the guys that went after that and talk about, give me a guy that went, a little bit later in this draft whose fit you really like. And I'll start and kind of get the ball rolling. And I'm super excited and fascinated to see what Jared Wilson does with the Patriots. He was a guy that there were some rumors, could he sneak up, and maybe go in that first round or maybe even early in the second round. Doesn't happen. He winds up going in the third round, but it just kind of, the way this played out is just very interesting in the fact that, David Andrews, a great Georgia player who was at New England for years, they release him, they need a center, and they go get Jared Wilson, who we know is super athletic, still has a lot to prove, only had 1 year at Georgia, and there were some hiccups along the way. But to get him in the third round, I really like that for the Patriots, and I think that sets up very well. New England's a very interesting team to watch in Drake May's second year, and they add Will Campbell, and now they got Jared Wilson there as well. I'll be keeping an eye on New England, especially during Jared Wilson's rookie year. Kipp, what about you? Is there one of these guys that went after the first round for Georgia whose fit you really like, who you're going to be paying attention to, particularly in their rookie year?
Well, if we're talking about, just value, it's tough not to talk about the Philadelphia Eagles taking linebacker Smile Munden. I just think you look at the fact that we thought he might go, middle of the fourth, early fourth round. And we knew that wasn't based on talent. It was just based on the fact that someone, fought through some injury issues at Georgia. And then, lo and behold, it's halfway through the fifth round. He's still on the board, and you see the Eagles are up, and it's just like, whatever, man. I'm getting tired of seeing this happen. And the Eagles take Smile Munden at 161 overall, and it's just them telling the league, like, why are you guys making this so easy for us? Like, why are all the settings turned off? No one's overriding our picks. And that's just what the Eagles do. It seems like they just they use common sense, and they just look at this guy and go, this is where this guy should be selected. And sure, I'll look at their depth chart and I'll say, wow, Zach Braun just had a Pro Bowl season. Before he got injured, Kobe Dean was having a breakout season. Sure, they just took Jahad Campbell at the end of the first round, another just, again, flex to the league. and had a guy taken actually higher than Small London last season, and Jeremiah Trotter, who looked pretty good in his rookie season. But that's what they do. They just prepare for the future, and they go, sure, we've got some guys in this position room who also, have had some injury issues. We don't know exactly when Kobe Dean or when Jahad will be ready. Let's just throw Smile in there too. And then, later on this season, maybe in the future, everyone will see Small London have, like 88 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, and we'll just be like, where did this guy come from? And we'll just be doing the pod going, I mean, he was one of the most athletic linebackers at Georgia and led Georgia in tackles a couple seasons ago. Of course, he's making plays for the Eagles now. I just think that it's just at this point, you can't say any Georgia player taken by the Eagles isn't a perfect fit. It just seems like they go right into the same culture, and they fit perfectly and make plays for them. So I hate saying it. It's disgusting to me, but congrats to Small London. You landed in a great location, great spot. I know you probably would have wanted to be taken earlier, but I don't think, looking back, you'll be too worried about the fact that maybe you went a round later than anybody thought you would.
Yeah, I think it'll work out well for Smile. Can't wait to hear how quickly NFL broadcasters and folks around the team learn how to say his first name. I already heard a lot of schmel over the weekend. So we'll see. And you make plays enough, they figure out how to say your name. Ben, how about you? Is there someone that went one of these later rounds that you're intrigued by?
I'm going to cheat and give 2. I think that, you hear a lot of times that teams adopt the identity of their head coach, and it almost feels like the Detroit Lions are trying to draft a team that has already adopted the identity of their head coach before they even get there. And I feel like Tate Ratledge and Dan Jackson specifically just scream Dan Campbell. Like they just, everything that Dan Campbell stands for, what he looks for from his players, meanness, toughness. Like you go back to his introductory press conference, ripping the kneecaps off to the opponent. Like that's Tate and Dan Jackson right there. And I'm sure they loved the player evals and the film that they watched on both of those guys. But I'm confident that when Dan Campbell had the opportunity to be in the same room as those two guys, that's what put them over the edge as being the right pieces for the Detroit Lions specifically. And I'm glad that they're going to be on a team together. You throw in Dom Lovett in there as well, who I don't think we were convinced was necessarily going to get drafted. He slips in there. More and more teams, I guess this is naturally what happens. This is probably how Alabama has felt over the last 2 decades, where it's like the Eagles are the Falcons team or the Georgia's team. And then it's like, oh, well, it's kind of the Packers and it's kind of the Steelers. And now it's kind of the Lions. And, I'm sure there's other teams that are going to throw their hat into that as well. Maybe the Falcons one day we're talking about as the team that just has all Georgia players. But the Lions have kind of become the next team up that are trying to fill their roster with Georgia guys. And I think in particular, those two, Tate and Dan, just are exactly what Dan Campbell is looking for from football players.
Hey, the Falcons started that pipeline on Thursday. That's all you need to know. But I wanted to talk to the point Ben was just making about the Lions. I honestly, just in hearing Dan Campbell over the years, was surprised it took them this long to draft a Georgia player. I was convinced here Stetson Bennett was coming out like that is a Dan Campbell guy. Like he's going to be all over, just he sees him as a winner and what he can bring. But when you were talking there, Ben, it reminded me something. Tate was a guy that I mocked to Detroit, so that wasn't necessarily a surprise. Was a little surprised to see them go get Dan Jackson. But the Dominant Lovett thing, it didn't really strike me until you were talking right there. Think about him as a special teams ace. It was him and Arian Smith running down and not allowing punt returns. I have a very vivid memory of Kirby stopping one of the practices we were at, and he was like, NFL scouts, pay attention to our special teams. We have the best special teams in the country. And a lot of that praise was for Dominant Lovett and Arian Smith. So, if I could kind of go back, I think I would have put more credence in Dominant Lovett's value in those later rounds as a special teams guy. I have no doubt he'll go to Detroit. He'll fit right in. And I think he'll be just as effective on special teams as he was at Georgia.
That's a great point. I hadn't even thought about that with Arian yet either, but I remember the exact practice you're talking about when Kirby stopped on the mic and said 11-6, NFL scouts, everybody look at him. And I really, Arian went a little bit earlier than we probably would have expected too. And, I was advocating for Arian Smith and why I think he can still be a smart draft pick and why I think his NFL career can definitely pan out, maybe more than the way that some people talk about him. But I hadn't really considered the, punt coverage side of things, and that he is probably going to be utilized as an asset there too.
Yeah, for sure. And I am really fascinated to see what Arian does there. And getting to play with a former Georgia quarterback in Justin Fields, maybe that's exactly what he needs as he gets his NFL career started. I want to make sure too and shout out the guys who were not drafted but signed undrafted free agent deals. Nazir Stackhouse with the Packers, Xavier Truss with the Broncos, 2 guys going to the Vikings, Chaz Chambliss and Ben Urosic. We did our superlatives on Sunday talking about all the different guys drafted, but we also talked about the guys we thought could stick with their teams as undrafted free agents. And Ben, you and I were on the same page in picking Chaz Chambliss. I just want to let you kind of talk about why you like that, why you think that Chaz could stick around in Minnesota.
Sorry, was that for me or Kipp?
I thought, did you not?
Yeah, you picked Chaz. You both picked Chaz.
Oh, I don't know. I guess that's what I was just feeling in that moment. I mean, I'll say this, I think he's a guy that's been doubted plenty. He's got a lot more Dan Jackson to him for someone that was highly recruited than people probably realize. Georgia, not that Georgia fans ever really doubted Dan Jackson, but Georgia fans were not always fair to Chaz Chambliss, I don't feel like, in terms of the role that he had carved out in Georgia's defense. And look, he's not going to be someone that's just going to blow you away with his physical attributes. He's not going to be this edge rushing type that is just going to dominate the person in front of them, but he is going to be exactly where you need him to be. He's going to do what you need him to do. And I think that NFL coaches just like guys that play football the right way. And I think when you're talking about guys that set the edge and know how to play that position, there's a lot of guys that don't do the things that they're supposed to do, and it costs you dearly on, defensively when you do things like that. And so I just feel like because he plays the right way, he's going to find a home. He's one of those guys where if he was 2 inches taller or a little bit longer, we wouldn't be having any of these conversations about would he have been drafted or not been drafted, but he just isn't quite the physical attributes that the NFL is looking for. And that's why he slipped. And that's why I don't think it's a slam dunk that he's going to end up having an NFL career, but I think that he has the mentality to be able to get it done.
Yeah, you look at Chaz, tied for the team lead in sacks with Jalen Walker. I think he was a half a tackle off of the tackles for loss lead with Jalen. He's a guy that I think is going to make his presence felt. And the nice thing for him, if he decides that, he doesn't wind up having a career in the NFL, he's got a lot of interest in MMA. So I think he's going to be active no matter what he's doing. Kipp, I really liked your pick as far as the undrafted free agents and Nazir Stackhouse, a guy that I really, really liked and was still a little bit surprised he did not go, he did not get selected in this year's draft. What do you think about his fit and, the impression he'll get a chance to make as an undrafted free agent?
When we got to that part of the superlatives, it started to become more of a depth chart discussion. I think that's really when the later draft picks, you have to find a situation that works best for them because teams aren't going to give up on early round picks that they made. And that's also why I picked Dan Jackson as my don't forget about, because the Lions have a couple Pro Bowl and an All-Pro duo at safety in Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch, but the guys behind them fighting for number 3, Lauren Strickland, Maurice Norris, Eric Hallett, those guys made no tackles last year. None of them were drafted by the Lions. So I love Dan Jackson's chance. I felt bad picking Nazir Stackhouse for the undrafted free agent with the best chance to stick because his best chance of making the roster it actually comes possibly at the cost of another Georgia guy that we haven't talked about a lot, but he just got picked in Warren Brinson, the 6th-round pick. When you put a 6th-round pick on someone, it's kind of maybe a 50-50. They make the roster, probably just a little bit less than that. So it's not a huge commitment there. But I kind of feel like they both might be fighting for the same spot there with the Packers because you got Devontae Wyatt, you got Kenny Clark, and they didn't bring in anyone to replace TJ Slayton after he left. So I think as far as a backup nose tackle position, they might be fighting for the same position. But then at the same time, you'll get Colby Wood, and he's on the roster too. If Warren Brinson can show he could be the backup 3 technique, then maybe Nazir Sackhouse comes in there and he wins that backup nose tackle job. But at that point in the draft, it's really depth chart discussion. And I just think that maybe both guys make it, but it's going to come down to camp. And I think as an undrafted free agent, that's really all you want. You want that opportunity to earn a spot in camp. And I think both those guys have the experience and the high caliber of play that where I think they have a shot. And I think Nazir's got probably one of the better shots of any undrafted free agents to make the roster.
Before we turn the page from the NFL draft discussion, I did want to go through the quote that Brad Holmes, the general manager of the Detroit Lions, had about Georgia. Thought this was really interesting. As we already talked about, they draft 3 Georgia players. They go get Tate Ratledge, they get Dan Jackson, they get Dominic Lovett. And asked about Georgia, Brad Holmes talked about that he had been to quite a few Georgia practices, and he said, quote, "It's unlike anything else that I've seen live in terms of a college practice, in terms of just the intensity. Saban at Alabama was very similar, but just the intensity, the physicality, the detail, the tempo, the whole thing, the energy. So when you can go through that kind of regimen and when you practice like that, you know that they're ready." And Ben, I'll kind of throw this to you, but say that, I think this was part of the conversation we had leading up to this draft, particularly when it comes to like the 5th, the 6th, the 7th round. It's like when you're going to roll the dice on some people, why not roll the dice on guys who come from a program like Georgia that know how to work, that know how to practice? I think guys like Brad Holmes take that idea to heart, and that was a big reason it played out the way it did for the Lions draft.
I think that's exactly what happens late in this draft. It's like, all right, you've got 3 linebackers that you feel, or you got 3 safeties that you feel good about. Why not take the guy that played at Georgia? And quite frankly, the same type of thing likely was happening with Ohio State and Notre Dame this year. They play for a national championship. That's why you see their draft numbers inflated a little bit, from previous years, because these teams, a lot of times you're splitting hairs with your evals on a lot of these players. And if you can have championship pedigree, be that little piece that pushes someone over someone else, like it's very easy for a GM or a coach or someone else to lean back and just say, all right, yeah, they're basically the same, but this guy has won at the previous level. Let's just go with him. He knows what a winning environment's like.
Kip, what'd you think about Brad Holmes' comments and just what that says about the way Georgia's looked at in the NFL?
I think when NFL coaches go to Georgia's practice, it really kind of backs up what Kirby Smart says, and what the players say is that, their practices are harder than games. That's what these coaches walk away thinking, that Kirby Smart can't come in and he's tried to make this an NFL pipeline and develop his players in NFL, because, that is his second goal other than just winning games. And I think that he's succeeded in that. He has made this a situation where they will lose guys to transfer and in recruiting, because they'll see this practice and say, I don't want that. Because that's what Kirby's trying to do. He's trying to filter that out, because he wants guys who are willing to put in the work, who are willing to eat off the floor, as they say, to prepare themselves for the NFL. And there's a cost to that. Like I said, there are guys that'll come and visit like during the spring and say, nope, don't want any of that. And it's not even a depth chart thing. It's just they do not want to have anything to do with Bloody Tuesday, and situations like that. But the upshot of that is that you do, again, get to brag after the draft every year, because when you filter out some of those tendencies to, maybe run away from something that's difficult, you tend to bring in guys and make sure that you have guys that are willing to put in the work for the long haul. And whether it's, the second round or the 6th round, the NFL GMs and scouts know these guys have already gone through Kirby Smart's filter. So that's basically our filter too. And I think that, he really has earned the respect of the league. They know they bring in one of these guys. They're not going to have to worry about work ethic with them. And I think that's huge, especially, day 2 and day 3 of the draft when you're trying to, when you're looking at your board and you have similar grades and go, yeah, like we don't have to worry about this guy. Like there's not a red flag there. I think that just is always going to benefit Georgia's players in the end.
I'll also add, and it sounds so corny probably to say this, but the Kirby always talks about, like, when we're talking about the NIL world and recruiting nowadays and things like that, like he always says, like, Georgia's going to recruit guys that love football. And, these NFL teams, they do unbelievable evaluations. They, basically have spies to figure out what these people have done throughout the course of their lives. But it's a lot easier to trust anything that you've learned or researched about these guys when you know that they've almost gone through a filtering process already and that they were recruited by someone who already deeply evaluated their love for football, and then they went through that 3 to 4 year filter of, all right, do you actually love football? And if you went to Georgia out of high school and stayed at Georgia for 4 years, you've got to love football because it is hard. It is not fun. You've heard Tate Ratledge talk about it publicly. Like it is only for people that love to play football. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time at Georgia. And I think that NFL teams love knowing that guys have stuck it out through some hard times at a place that wasn't always fun to be at.
And I'd say, too, with the relationships that Kirby Smart has with folks in the league and how they have that open door policy, I imagine that there's probably been plenty of coaches, front office personnel from the NFL who reach out to Kirby, and Kirby's going to shoot them straight. And to the credit of a lot of the guys that just went to the NFL, I mean, I really feel like he had nothing but positives to say about them, and that only helped them when it came to their draft stock. Before we turn the page from the NFL draft, Kipp, I was going to let you talk about the Falcons draft and anything else, from the rest of the league that kind of stood out to you over the course of the 7 rounds.
And we almost made it 24 hours of feeling good about that Falcons draft before we got reminded which franchise we follow. I think I have a hard time going back and finding a draft where I didn't throw my hands up in the air and have to turn the pages in my draft guide to find who the Falcons just picked. They actually went through there and just picked guys that were the best value at that time. And even the undrafted free agents they brought in. A lot of these guys in the draft thread on the Junkyard were like among the top 10 picks I had for the Falcons in the 4th round and the 7th round. And so I think overall, the guys that they brought in, it seems like on paper they have improved the talent especially on defense. I don't know if they're going to be able to stop the run. They still need a big defensive tackle, but really, really happy with this year's draft. And if the Falcons don't make the playoffs, we'll have different guys coming in making the 2nd through 7th round picks next year. But I think at this point, you have to have some level of, I don't want to say excitement, but, I think there's positive vibes following a draft for the first time in a while. And that's really the best you can hope for from a Falcons perspective. So whatever if they need to send only offensive coaches next year or whatever, or only special teams coaches to the combine next year, go for it, because I think that really paid off for them. And thinking about next year's draft, I actually want to ask you guys a question. Who's your pick for first rounder from Georgia next year? Or if there's more than one, but who do you think is going to be a first rounder off this Georgia roster next year?
I'll start it while Ben thinks, because I actually wrote about this on Monday. I got Dalen Everett. I think with his size, 6'1", I think that he strikes me as someone, he could have gone pro this year, and maybe he would have been 3rd, 4th round, maybe higher than that had he tested well. But I really see Dalen Everett as the guy that comes out here and winds up making himself a corner that, gets that first round buzz. And I thought he played really well last year. I can't wait till we're having this conversation next year We're going to see a lot of that Texas tape from both of those games because I don't know what pissed him off about playing Texas or if he just wanted to rise to the occasion because he had a fantastic showing in both those Texas games. To me, right now, it's him, and then the other guy is Christian Miller, who I think is going to be extremely important for this year's defense. And I think that this defense is only as good as Christian Miller is. I'm not quite as confident when I look at him as a first-round pick compared to Dalen Everett. I feel really good about Dalen at this point. But Christian's got a lot of upside, and I like his chances.
I'll be honest with you. I've been sitting here thinking like I don't have a great answer. Like if you had asked us this question last year, I think everyone would have said Michael and Malachi. I don't know how many people would have said Jalen necessarily. Like I think he's the one that played his way into being a first rounder this year. So I feel like there's still, if I'm people that I think could play their way in just based on their skill set, this is off the wall. It's not someone that I would actually probably pick to be a first rounder right now, but a guy that I think could theoretically is Raylan Wilson, which sounds crazy because of how deep that room is. It's going to be hard to get snaps. He probably had some, Jamon Dumas-Johnson type of thoughts this year where it's like, all right, you've got these young guys, you've got CJ Allen, like where do I fit in here? But I imagine he's going to run as well as any linebacker in next year's draft class is going to run when he gets to the combine. I don't know what kind of film he's going to put up this year. That's why it's a little bit of a risky pick. But I just think in terms of what the NFL likes and what he is physically, if he has a good season, I think he could play his way into being that. He's obviously not that right now. He's not even a guy that's guaranteed to leave after this year or, go pro after this year. But I think that he's got the tools.
I like that pick. He was number 4 on my list that I had on Monday because of his athleticism. He strikes me as a guy that if he has a good year, has a real opportunity. Kipp, who would you pick? Who would be your first round guy or guys?
Well, I mean, I think Everett has to be the favorite just based on the tape he already has. But if we're projecting a year from now, we're also thinking what is the absolute ceiling of a breakout season? If a guy plays up to his highest potential, who's a guy or two who could squeeze into that, and then have an incredible combine as well. And I had 2 guys kind of stick out to me. One I think might cause some people some consternation, and that's Monroe Freeling, just because he didn't have a good game in the season against Notre Dame. He struggled in that game, but I look at the fact that he was also, like we found out, everyone on the offensive line, he was banged up. When he was healthy early in the season, remember when he came in, he stepped in when Ernest Green was banged up and played lights out. I think that showed me his potential. I think, overall, I would lean towards he probably has a really good season and then comes back to improve his stock. But if he plays lights out from start to finish, he's got all the tools to be an elite offensive tackle. And I think at Georgia, they've already shown if you have one really good season at Georgia, NFL teams count that as like a whole career especially with this schedule. He's going to have plenty of NFL tape. The other guy might even shock you more, Zachariah Branch. He plays the slot position, but I mean, we just saw what Ladd McConkey can do after, the fact that he was taken just outside the first round and just blew it up as a rookie in the NFL. I think Zachariah Branch has a different skill set than most slot guys. And he's shown flashes that he can just take over. He can live up to his high ranking. He's just really talented, very explosive. And I think that Georgia is going to make it a focus to get the ball to whoever is lining up in the slot this season, because they've always they've done numbers at that position. And I just think of all the guys that Georgia's had in recent years, possibly including Ladd McConkey, I think Zachariah Branch is really set up well to have a highly productive season at Georgia. And if he does, he can go into the combine, blow that thing up, and definitely hear his name called among the first 30 picks in the draft.
I was looking just at his measurables, very comparable to Matthew Golden, who just went in the first round of the Packers. So I would say that that's a good pick as well. Ben, any parting thoughts just on this draft as a whole? Anything else that interested you over the 7 rounds?
My only parting thought is that I was debating between Raylan Wilson and Monroe Freeling, so I think that Kipp made a good choice there.
We always love to see just everybody's on the same page here at Dawgs 24/7. That's what's always so fun. Did want to mention too, just looking into the summer, I think we'll probably scale it back a little bit to usually about one episode a week. But if there's breaking news, if there's recruiting news, we will have that there. And, there will be plenty of Stay Wolk episodes, which we'll preview the next one toward the end of this episode. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back, talk about Georgia's latest addition from the transfer portal. We're going to talk about Georgia basketball, adding 2 guys from the portal, and give a positive update on Georgia baseball. Guys, just when we thought Georgia football might be done in the portal, they came along on Saturday and delivered with an in-state product. They got interior offensive lineman Wolk Flynn Jr. from UCF. He is coming off his true freshman season with the Knights. Did not play at all, but for a former 4-star lineman from Grayson. A lot to like about this addition and what it can mean for the future. I'll start with you, Ben, because we were sort of talking about this when it happened. A lot to like with this addition, but what can you tell us about Wolk Flynn?
Well, I think, he's a depth addition. They want more center options. They weren't expecting to lose Jared Wilson after 1 year of playing offensive line. I think that's part of what comes into this is, all right, you want to have bodies there. Sure, you feel good about Drew Bobo. Sure, you've got some young guys like Cortez Smith. You got Dontrell Glover coming in that have the ability to snap the football. But I think you just want to have more protection and security there at that position in particular. And, he is a guy, like you said, I got, know him from his Grayson days a little bit, and everyone around the Grayson program speaks super highly of him. I don't know how much of a role, if any, he's going to really carve out at Georgia, especially early on. But I mean, anytime you're adding bodies on the offensive line and not losing bodies on the offensive line, I think it's a good sign.
Definitely. And reading through on his 24/7 Sports profile, he's a guy that got a lot of praise during the All-American Bowl. We had written about him as one of the top performers. So there's a lot of potential there. And again, this is another instance that we've seen a few times with Georgia. They love getting guys with multiple years of eligibility. It's a guy that, the comparison I always make is London Humphreys, his freshman year, or his sophomore year, rather, at Georgia. I don't think he necessarily played as big of a role that year as some people expected, but I think Georgia looked at him as a long-term addition, and I think he'll play a bigger role this year. So if Wolk Flynn Jr. doesn't play a ton this year, don't panic and don't think that's a bad sign. I really like what he brings and his potential at Georgia. Kipp, what do you think about the addition and just what Georgia's done to this point in the portal?
I don't mean this at all negatively to Wolk, but if he doesn't play much this year, it also could be a really good thing because it could mean that maybe Drew Bobo is healthy for most of the season. Drew Bobo looked, pretty impressive when he had to come in and play last season, but I also don't think, Georgia wanted that situation to really happen at all, but it kind of reminds you of what they just always try to prepare for. It is to be, have guys ready to step in. And if you look, beyond Drew Bobo, it's okay. Is Malachi Tolliver ready in year 2 to step in and be a center? He could also be at guard, but is he your backup center? Or are you going to ask a true freshman in Cortez Smith or maybe Dontrell Glover to be your center? And when you just look at it that way, it's like, that is not an ideal situation. You're probably taking a guard and plugging them in, someone more experienced in the offensive line, which, to be honest with you, not a lot of experience on the offensive line at any position right now. I mean, after Ernest Green, Monroe Freeling, it's a pretty young group. I mean, you got Micah Morris as well, but as far as just playing time, it's not really extensive. So the next best thing you can do beyond experience is competition. Bring some guys in there and just see what happens. Try to the best man wins. And I think that when you look at the other guys that I just named, I think Walt Clare, he projects fairly well to be able to, at the very least, push those guys to get better. But I think it makes a lot of sense. And it's, looking back, kind of surprising they didn't get a center in earlier. So they probably noticed that. They went back and looked at the film, and following G-Day, because they're the only ones that have that film, and said, you know what, oops, we probably could use some more competition at this position. And I think it looks like a really, really smart move for them, and it's basically them CYA. They are just covering their own butt and saying, guys, we got really close to the end of this transfer portal window and not having any depth at this position. I don't know how we got this far. Let's fix this now. So it makes a lot of sense, and I think they stuck it in, and the roster as it stands now, I mean, looks like they're pretty set for the fall with what they have on the roster right now.
Yeah, adding 4 guys after the spring, I think they're in good shape, and not necessarily expecting them to add anybody else. I think that they've pretty much put the finishing touches. And, again, as Kipp said, I think they did a good job of finding what holes they had on this roster, the biggest one being outside linebacker, and getting Elo Mendoza there and filling them. And I think they're in good position going into 2025. All right, Georgia men's basketball minute, a very productive Monday for Georgia. They pick up 2 guards. It started with St. Mary's Jordan Ross, and then a little bit later they picked up UTSA's Marcus Millender. Wanted to talk briefly about both of those guys. I'll have some breakdowns of them over the course of this week. Jordan Ross, his shooting numbers aren't great, but I don't think that's necessarily a reason to panic. He comes from a program that's done a lot of winning at St. Mary's. He's a guy that gets to the rim quite a bit. Was impressed with just the highlights I watched before we started recording on that front, his defense, because to me, that is the biggest question as far as the backcourt after losing Silas Jimmery Jr. Yeah, Silas was a big-time scorer, but he was a very good defender. I think Jordan Ross helps on that front, trying to fill that need. Can pile up assists, has a nice mid-range jumper. Not going to be a guy that shoots a ton from 3 just based on what I saw, but I like that addition as someone who's experienced, and they've added quite a bit of experience to this backcourt. The other guy, Marcus Millender, this is behind Cannon Catchings. This is the guy I'm most excited about that they have added this offseason. Super quick feet, just watching the highlights I watched. I mean, the way he cuts, the way he moves. He played really well in a non-conference game against Arkansas last year. I think he ended up with 16 in that game. Sharpshooter from deep, and he does not mind pulling up from very deep. So if you've been in Stegman, they got that huge Bulldog logo in the middle. I think he's going to be standing on that logo, hitting a few shots along the way. He also is a rim runner quite a bit, but just a very good catch and shoot kind of 3-point shooter. I really like that addition. And as we were talking about in our chat, his nickname is Smurf. We got a Smurf. We got a blue cane. I really hope the fans step up and take advantage of that this season. I want to see some really neat outfits. But really, I like both of those guards. I kind of expect Smurf to be the starting point guard and Jordan Ross to be a guy that comes off the bench. But that was a big need at this point for Georgia, was point guard. And they went and filled it with 2 guys that I think are really talented. And guys that I think we'll see quite a bit of in this season. Kipp, what did you think of these 2 additions and just where this roster is at this point in the offseason?
Well, I mean, the transfer portal took 4 guards away. They've now added 4, so you gotta like that. They both have a defined skill set, and I think that really should help as far as just having the right 5 on the floor and also just providing different looks. I mean, I think you needed someone who would not turn the ball over. And I think, you get that in Jordan Ross. And then having a guy that could just shoot lights out. You have to love that, what Smurf brings to the table there. And that kind of goes back to the arching theme of this transfer portal this offseason for Georgia is we need better shooting. And once again, you get a guy that almost 44% from three, and you realize the jump up in competition, that number should go down. But let's just, if it's 30 over 37, if he's shooting 38%, goodness, what Georgia could have done with a guy like that last season. And then, like I said before, having someone who can actually distribute the ball without turning it over, I think Jordan Ross brings an outstanding skill set to the team as well. He shot 38% from the field. That is an issue. You're going to know exactly what he does not need to be doing unless he just has an outstanding summer for Georgia, shooting under 30% from three. But at the same time, just get the ball to the other guys. You got playmakers on this roster. I think overall, Mike White's done a good job just bringing guys that have upside, athleticism. Catchings has to be the guy they thought he was going to be for this team to be a tournament team in the end. It's going to come down to, the elite talent that you have on the roster. And you got guys like Somto who could still take a huge step, look great on the court last season, but developing him next to the Catchings and having guys that can give you elite front court play is probably still going to be what gets Georgia through that conference schedule. And then these guys who can shoot threes, if they can get to the tournament, those are the guys that can get you, a win or two and take that next step as a program.
Yeah, you hit on several things that I was going to point out. The shooting, I mean, statistically, they should be a better shooting team this season with what they've added. Marcus Millender, the guy they got really early on in the portal, and Justin Bailey from Wofford, a very good shooter, especially outside. You have to account for the step up in competition, which will be significant. But looks like on paper they should be a better shooting team this year. And then you hit on the thing that I put on the board on Monday. To me, this thing goes as far as Canning Catchings can bring it. I mean, he's a guy that coming into BYU, people thought had a very good chance to be a one and done. Didn't quite hit that mark at BYU, goes in the portal, winds up coming to Georgia. He is probably your most talented player, but he's got to put it together and he's got to be consistent. So can he do that? If he does that on a consistent basis, I do think this can be an NCAA tournament team. But we're going to have to see how he fits in and really how this entire roster comes together. Ben, what do you think of these two latest additions and just where Georgia basketball is right now?
Well, we talked about once Silas left, Georgia is going to have to find a few different pieces to put the backcourt together the way that they wanted to. I think that, to what Kipp said, everyone seems to serve a specific type of role where you're going to be able to have some different matchups and things like that. And, last year when it was in crunch time situations, like it was Silas and Blue, and that's what Mike White's options really were, because they were going to create the best matchup no matter who it was they were playing against. It feels to me like they've put together a little bit more of a versatility backcourt where when you need some length or slashers to get to the rim, you're going to have some of that. When you've got guys that are going to shoot at a higher clip from 3-point range than you've had the last couple of years, you're going to have some of that. You've got some guys that play above the rim, some guys that play below the rim. And it's like you just have the right sort of mashup of guards that makes sense. Now, whether or not, it is enough to get Georgia over the hump or not, that's all that's going to matter with this, right? Is like, does Georgia shoot better than it did last year? Does Georgia score more points in clutch time than it did last year? Like, that's what's going to determine whether they've actually upgraded the roster or not. And, I can throw on as many clips of all these guys as I want, but until I see how it actually all fits together, it's really impossible to say.
The only other note I would say, I feel like this is a very experienced team. This is not a team with a lot of underclassmen, and we'll be interested to see how the signees like Jacob Wilkins and the other two guys they signed from high school, how they fit in, because they'll be in the mix some. But I feel like this is a roster that has proven minutes at the college one, the Division I level, albeit not in the SEC.
Also, I forgot to point out, I mean, one thing Jordan Ross brings to the table is he actually won a game in the tournament. The man went out there and led his team in scoring in that win over Vanderbilt. Actually shot the ball well in that game. Went up against the buzzsaw in Alabama in the next game. But I think just the fact that he led a team, to a win, he brings that kind of experience. And I believe, Bailey and Catchings have tournament experience as well. And you bring back the four guys that you bring back that, again, played in the tournament this past season. So just having 7 guys with tournament experience has to be huge for Mike White, because it's really not something that, he would have been able to say before. So I think that kind of goes, that's a little, should probably be talked about more. It's just the fact that he also went and got guys that have winning experience, not just guys that filled stats for bad teams.
Switching over to Georgia baseball before we end this episode. Georgia now 35-11 overall, coming off a good series against Oklahoma. A little iffy at first. They lose the first game 6-8, but they bounce back well. 10-9 win on Friday, and then a 6-3 win against the Sooners on Saturday. Needed that, and they've got a really good opportunity ahead. They host Kennesaw State on Tuesday night, and then they go to Missouri. And guys, would either of you guys like to guess how many conference wins the Tigers have at this point in the season?
Based on the way that you ask that, I'm going to say 0.
None. They have yet to win a conference game. So they need to go out there. They need to sweep that. But big to beat that Oklahoma team. I think Oklahoma came into that series number 14 overall, getting things back on track, and a good opportunity when you go on the road to play Missouri ahead of some big series. They play Alabama coming up. They play Texas A&M. It's going to be a tough end to the regular season. We're about a little bit under a month away from that SEC tournament in Hoover, but I like the fact that Georgia was able to win that home series, and they got an opportunity in these next 4 games before they really finish things off with some tough games to end the regular season. All right, let's get ready to wrap this episode up. But before we do, I wanted to ask you, Kipp, the Atlanta Braves are now 13-15. Is this the week? Do they finally get to 500?
I have really enjoyed your random Braves photos. I would hate to see that end, but I also just have to give credit. It's probably been, what's led to this. I think anytime you're playing a team that is 4-24, it should help in that regard. Those Rockies, they looked horrible. I mean, it's just, what is going on there? Like, why did you give Chris Bryant so much money? I mean, that was kind of where this franchise just lost the plot a little bit, and they haven't recovered since. But they should. I mean, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to sweep this series. And then, there's a different team that is going to be coming into town after that, and that's the Dodgers. So, you know what? I'd love for the Braves to go into that series 500. It would just feel like, okay, so let's start the season now and see what happens. So I love it. You got Chris Sale and then Grant Holmes going on the mound against the Dodgers. I like their chances. I think this is the week. That Friday game is going to be. I mean, I'm pumped. And 3 weeks ago, I would have been like, I am teetering on checking out. This feels like 1990 all over again. Let's see what happens next year. And so it does. If we're playing 500 baseball, going in May, it doesn't sound great, but it sounds great to Kipp from 3 weeks ago, and I'll take that. That's a big win.
My wife and I are going to a couple of Dodgers Braves games this weekend. Ben, are you going to let me back on the pod if I have to rock that?
If you're wearing the Dodgers hat, I mean, I have no choice but to let you on the pod. But what will I make a comment? 100%, I'll make a comment.
Hey, I'll say this: if we get on this podcast and if the Braves take that series, I'll make sure and pass along a photo of my wife in a Braves hat, because she will have to pay up her end of the bet. Wanted to say, too, before we get out of here, just wanted to send along thoughts and prayers for Jeff Dantzler. His wife, Emily, passed away earlier this week. Very sad news for Jeff Dantzler and his family, someone who's been a part of the Georgia family forever. So just wanted to pass along those good vibes before we end this podcast. So we'll wrap it up right there. Thanks, everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening to this after the fact. Be sure to go to Dawgs247.com, subscribe there, go to our YouTube, go to our TikTok, all kinds of good content as we roll this thing along. I do want to give you an opportunity real quick, Ben. We're going to do a Stay Wolk this week. Give us a little preview of what we can watch for.
We'll be talking Jared Curtis, as we have been, it seems like, every episode leading up to his May 5th decision. There have been a couple other decisions that have been shifted around, so we'll talk a little bit more in detail than we have on some of these about those. I hesitate to do this because I'm not actually doing the interview until after this. So I won't say who it is, but I am anticipating us having one of Georgia's transfers on as a guest for the show as well. And I'll leave it at that. And if I don't live up to that expectation, just know something went awry on my Tuesday afternoon.
It's going to be a fun one, and I hope you guys will check out that episode when it comes out. So we'll wrap it up right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.